back in music just last couple of years. And then I explain how I make music and how I use these tools underneath the name Learning Modular. And I have a separate set of websites and courses even on modular synthesis underneath that name as well. So I like to explore both the left and right sides of the brain of creating with these tools, but also you also have to engage the other side of the brain and be very technical to use these tools as well. And how do I balance those two sides off against each other? There's going to be a lot of the conversation here as well. So we'll wait a couple more minutes for some other people to show up, but I just wanted to prep that I'm going to be trying to talk both to what's the landscape of music making with these tools and why do people make some of the decisions they do and what tools they decide to use. But then also specifics on what tools I'm using and how I'm using them to create music. Cool. Has the stream started yet? You want to take the thumb up to me, we've started streaming as well. Hi to everyone out there in web land as well. Please be part of the chat. If you have any questions, we have a person in the room who will be relaying chat questions as well, in addition to the audience here. If you see me looking this way, it's because I'm talking to the people in the room. I'm not ignoring you, internet, sorry, just letting you know. As I've been chatting with some people beforehand, I really want to talk on two different levels. I want to talk about what are these different tools we use to create electronic music, and what's their general groupings, why people make decisions to use different ones, and how do they combine them. And just give an idea of how this music's being made. And on the other hand, I also want to go into details too about what are the choices I've made, what are the tools I'm using, and why I'm using them the way that I am. And I'm hoping to then end by going through last night's concert, but breaking it down that every time I would introduce a new piece, bring down the level and explain to you, what am I doing up here? What am I engaging? Why have I decided to do that in this particular moment? For those who are not that familiar with electronic instruments, they can be thought in different classes like you can acoustic instruments. Acoustic instruments we tend to think as percussion, or strung instruments, or blown instruments. And to a large degree, electronic instruments can be broken down into a few categories as well. A very common group is called, we call hardware instruments. So when you see, like on the keyboard, Steve Roach is playing, where it's self-contained, it has a keyboard, it has a sound generating facilities, it has a user interface, all in one device, we call that a hardware instrument. Drum machines come in that format as well, like the electronic drum machines he was talking about, etc. Those tend to be pre-packaged instruments, and that a lot of decisions have been made by the designers of what types of sounds they want to make, how they expect the user to interact with that instrument to make those sounds. So they're your own, like, fully born instruments that you learn. A very popular variation on that is what are called modular synthesizers. Modular synthesizers are like hardware synths that have been exploded and turned inside out. Rather than everything being wired internally to already make sound and present to the user interface, modular synths take all that internal circuitry and expose it to the user and say, well, here's a sound that makes a tone, and here's the part of the module that modifies the tone, and here's the part that changes the volume level of that tone, and you can interchange those parts. So modular synths are like hardware synths deconstructed to the point where you can mix and match different components, combine them in different ways that maybe the original designer did not imagine they would go together, and create your own instruments. The downside is some assembly is required. You need to know how to patch all this stuff together to create those sounds. It's not already been done for you as a nice hardware instrument. And then the third type of instrument has become very common is what's referred to as virtual instruments. And those are things that reside inside a computer, or your phone, or a tablet, or a laptop. If you want, we can switch to mine. I'm using a particular digital audio workstation called Ableton Live, where it can act as my audio recorder, it can act as my audio mixer, but it's also capable of playing back sounds, capable of hosting plugins that may recreate specific instruments or percussion sounds or whatever. There's a lot of people who devote themselves to just using a laptop or an iPad or a phone to have in a virtual environment to make music. And quite often musicians will dedicate themselves substantially to one of these ways of making electronic music. lots of keyboards and drum machines, the hardware approach. There's a lot of people who do just strictly modular approach to making music, and have small to large arrays of modules that they repattch together to create different sounds that suit their taste. Some people will specialize in virtual instruments. But another approach, and I think it's becoming more common these days, is what's called a hybrid approach, where someone will say, I don't want to be limited to just one of the worlds. I don't want to play just drums, or just strum instruments, or just woodwinds. I want to play drums and piano. So people are combining hardware, modular, and virtual instruments to create their own personal band, their own personal symphony. And that's what I have started doing with my own live performances. Up until last October or so, when I would go out to perform live, I would just strictly bring modular gear with me. Now I'm doing a hybrid where I'm bringing modular gear and a laptop with virtual gear, so I can get a mixture of those two and combine their abilities and let them play off of each other's strengths. So I'm going to describe to you how I've divided up those worlds myself in my own system. But people make different decisions on how they want to do things. Do they want to do the drums inside a hardware device? Or do they want to do their drums inside a modular set? Do they want to do drums inside the laptop? Those are personal choices. These are just some of the choices I've made in my system. So what I've done is in my modular is I focus very heavily on doing percussion sounds with it. I have a set of modules up here that produce different rhythmic patterns, not the actual sounds, but just the patterns of like play something on this note, play something on this note, play something on this note. And then I have an array of modules that then turn around and produce sounds. You hit it with what's called a trigger, the electrical signal. It says, okay, I will make a sound in response to that trigger. Something I was using a lot of last night, and just go ahead and change the mix so you hear just that, is a kick drum sound. So I have this very simple, I've got an echo with that as well. And I can come up with these very simple patterns, like 4-on-4 disco kick, more complex stuff. A very simple one hit every measure music. And then maybe with another module, combine patterns to get some more interesting interplay. This LED is blinking with some of the hits, and this LED blinks with the main hit. So that's one common thing I do with this, is I'll use a variety of modules. In this case, I'm using something called Euclidean circles, based on the map of Euclid, which has been found to really relate to a lot of ethnic rhythm patterns. And also grids with my main percussion modules. Grids is very fun for me because the creator, Emily Gillet, did an analysis of drum patterns, particularly using dance music, came up with 25 chord patterns, mapped out as a grid of 5 on the x-axis, 5 on the y-axis, and then allow you to go ahead and move between any of those 25 chord patterns, but then as you are in between, combines those patterns together to create hybrid patterns in between. I love percussion. I am a lousy drummer, so it's useful for me to use tools like that where some of the bass decisions have been made for me. But I can be a producer and say, I want this pattern, or I want a mixture of this pattern and that pattern. Now they'll trigger these sounds that I've chosen to be triggered by those patterns. That's where something like a modular approach works very well for someone like me, where I would say, this generates my drum patterns, this generates my drum sounds, I create my own personal drum kit. Other things I have inside this instrument is down here, I have a synthesizer voice section, where I go ahead and create some of the more simple monophonic synth sounds you might have here, stuff like nodes and stuff like that. I just bring up a simple pattern here. And then down here. I can change the mixture of sounds. I have 2 different main sound sources. One is this very mellow sound. One's of a higher pitch. I'll mix them together, and then decide how I will, what we will filter them. Take some of those original harmonics and remove some of them to make the sound less complex. So I might go ahead and really dampen down like this. first. That's another section of my modular synth. It's dedicated to creating these traditional synth sounds. Some people may have dedicated keyboards for. Then I have another section down here, which has a microphone input. Didn't use that last night. But also has what are called kind of like sound modeling modules. A couple of resonators, for example, that are good at recreating sounds of struck metal plates, or plucked strings, or sympathetically vibrating strings. Let me bring that up a little bit here. And I can take it from plucked string. Something's a little more metallic. Just little struck pieces. Or harmonically vibrating strings like synthesizers. So I've kind of broken my system down into different types of sound generation, depending on what I want to use for a particular piece. Other sections I have inside my modular synth are some effects devices, reverbs, echo units, things like that. I have a whole section down here for echoing that I like to use. I have a reverb I like in this particular case. But what I've done is, instead of trying to do everything inside the modular, I've also started to use a laptop for some of these things. So some of the sounds also are coming from my laptop. For example, if I want to play some simple synthesizer chords, maybe akin to what Z was playing, I can use this controller. It's called a push by Ableton to play notes, not on my modular, but played strictly on my laptop, that are virtual recreations of a hardware synthesizer, I mean, a keyboard, like this sound. Something else that's unusual about this particular controller that I'm using is instead of being like a traditional black and white keys like a keyboard, it's becoming more popular for people to use what are called pad controllers, where there are a series of pads that you press rather than keys on a keyboard. And they can be reconfigured in different ways. A really common way to reconfigure these things is as a some use them as guitar sort of layouts. Here we go. Where notes are overlapped by guitar tunes such as fourths, etc. So you play different notes at the same time. The pink keys represent the root note. If you're playing in C, it would be the C note. Shows where they're repeated. This key is the same as this key, is the same as this key, kind of like different offset parts of the guitar. I particularly really like a mode called sequential, where this particular controller says, here are all of my root notes. In different octaves. And in terms of music theory, instead of having to remember which notes are in the scale, it's laid out by saying, well, that's the root, that's the first. Here's the second, the third, the fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and the next octave. And it allows me to put into any musical scale I want. The root could be A, G, E flat, or whatever. I can make a minor scale, a Dorian, a Lydian, a Phrygian, a Locrian. It will automatically remap the keys on the keyboard to just those paths. So for someone like me who does not have maybe the depth of musical knowledge or years of piano playing, this is a more intuitive way for me to play, because I know a pretty interval like a fifth is always going to be the same shape no matter what key I'm in. these notes together. So I've really taken the pad controller as an alternative to keyboard controllers because they make it much easier for me to switch between different musical keys and different musical scales. And I have to remember how many black keys are in this scale, and just say, here's my layout, where's my octaves, and where all my musical intervals are. I like that way of playing. That's personal preference of mine. Get back to the words here. There we go. Some of the sounds that I have loaded into the laptop are similar to sounds that Steve Roach has in his laptop or in the old 1010 music black boxes, where instead of being notes on a keyboard, they're environments, or they're vocal sounds or whatever. So in my case, sometimes I have just spoken phrases. I'm going to pull something down here quick to not reveal something like that. Pull this down. So just these phrases of a dead woman speaking phrases from a dead environment.
Buddha of compassion. All Buddhas of the past, present, and future.
And other examples I have in here are much longer environments. I have a collection of what are called ambient vocals by various singers in England. This particular singer is named Holly Drummond, where she's done up to minute-long vocalizations and reverbs. So I just play that one sample, and I get a whole vocal performance by Holly Drummond. Stop prematurely. One little trick that I use, which is really handy for performance, I can use in open live, but also depends on black box that Steve was talking about, is these instruments can be set up to quantize when they make a change. Instead of playing a note the second I go touch a pad, I can say, when I touch a pad, take that action on the next beat, or on the next measure, or 2 measures from now. And as a solo performer, that's really handy to be able to say, cue up these things to happen on the next measure, the next downbeat, so I can turn over here and do something else at the same time. So it's one of the tricks of the electronic instruments, is being able to give them commands for them to play later on at a particular point in time, so then you can go change instruments and go play something else. That's why you notice when I'm impressing something, there's a delay till it comes up, because we're actually running at a tempo right now. This is clocking out the measures and the beats and the fractions of the beat. And we'll wait for the next measure until it brings that in. And it's much easier for me to coordinate live performance rather than having to have several hands at once. The same thing with stopping. And that's kind of one of the reveals of playing electronic music live, is when you have an acoustic instrument, such as a saxophone or a guitar, it makes a certain set of sounds, and you are then playing the notes of those sounds. And it's easier with those instruments to practice them to a point where your performance becomes subconscious. It just flows out of you. But quite often when you're doing performances with electronic instruments, one electronic instrument can make multiple different sounds. And if you want to change what sound that makes, you have to break out of this zone of just performing to anticipate, okay, I need to now go to these different sounds. I need to change these parameters ahead of time so I'm ready to play that sound. It will be ready to be this different instrument. So live performance is really switching between being in the moment, reacting to the sound, playing music, and being a chess player of thinking a few moves ahead. Of, I want to go here next. I need to go set up this one instrument to go be a different instrument. So when I get there, it's ready. So that's a lot of the dance of live electronic performance. It's not just being in the zone, but also, what's the next zone? I better get ready for that. And a lot of the tools that I use here, such as playing these feminine vocals, re-spoken phrases, I'm multitasking. Okay, start playing that. Let's start setting up for the next sound, and then I can come back and change sounds again. So it's quite a this brain switching that goes on for electronic performer during a concert, of being in the zone, then having to think technically where you're going to go next. I also have a lot of my effects in addition to instruments inside the computer. Some of my really lovely high frequency angelic reverbs are being done inside the computer using a software program. In this case, I'm using something called Valhalla Shimmer. It's called a shimmer because it takes the original sound, transposes it up one octave higher, and then reverberates that. So just hearing the original sound in the space, you're hearing that sound repeated at a higher pitch. And there's a couple things. It's a kind of a nice angelic effect. But I find that using effects like that that radically changes sound are very handy. Because you can have the main instrument be one component that you're playing, and then the effect almost becomes a counterpoint or a second component. If a reverb or an echo sounds just like the original, you don't know that's one sound being played, da, 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 or if it's an echo doing. But if the echo sounds radically different than the original sound, like Steve playing with harmonizers on ocarina and stuff like that, now the effects become like a second musician playing in response to what you originally did. And I really like effects that transform sounds in new spaces, because you can play one thing, throw it into that space, and it'll come back as something else. That's another way a solo performer can interact with the instruments, by throwing stuff at it and having the instrument come back with a different response. You can tell it's okay to remove my mask, so you can hear me more clearly. I did do a rapid test this morning on negative, so I won't affect any of you today. So you got this. Now, the fun thing is that, yeah, I have this monitor doing a bunch of stuff. And I have this laptop doing a bunch of stuff. And they could exist as their own two separate worlds I play next to each other in parallel. But I've made a real point with this system of letting the two systems really interact with each other, so that sounds from the computer can go back to the modular. Sounds from the modular can go through the computer. And that really opens up what I can do with sounds. The main thing that makes that possible for me is I have one particular module from the company called Expert Sleepers. I don't know where people come into some of these module names or company names. It's an ES9, and it's basically a sound card for a computer, but rather than being a box that sits outside of the computer, it's a module that sits inside of my modular synthesizer. And it has a number of inputs and outputs that translate the level the modular works at, which is much higher than the typical audio levels. Translates it into the computer signal, it goes through this USB cable into the computer. But more importantly, the computer can then send those signals back into the module, so I can process those sounds with the module if I want to. So to give you some ideas of how I'm doing that, I have that plucked sound I was creating with the module inside of here, but then I'm sending it through a plugin in the computer. If I was to play this plucked sound all by itself, and let's go ahead and bring up just that rings, and cancel out its effects sound. Yeah, I think I've done that already on it. Oh, there we go. Just that plucked sound by itself sounds like this. It has a bit of echo in it as well. So by sending it through a reverb inside the computer, I can add this extra dimension to it. By using that shimmer effect, it's coming at a much higher pitch than the original tone is. So I think I get that separation when you hear it's in two different instruments being played. Now, I'm both a fan and a friend of Steve Roach's. I've been learning some of his techniques and wondering how I can apply it down to a smaller system like this. And the idea behind the system is, what can I fly with? What can I get into overhead luggage in an airplane? My second item in the backpack on an airplane? And then this, with all my power supplies and cables, into one checked bag, so I can fly anywhere with just this gear. I've had to take a lot of ideas like Steve plays with, and see how I can reproduce the sound so I can fly with. But still use his ideas. He mentioned one of his favorite things is the difference between pre-fader send and post-fader send for reverbs. And what that means is I can take out the original sound and still have just the reverb. In the case of this plucked sound, if I take out the original, I can can leave with just a really beautiful wash by itself. They can mix in the original plug. Never let it come back and be dry so you don't get reverb anymore. And turn down the reverb setting. Start with one sound and get several different sound worlds out of it by sound by itself, process sound by itself, mixture of the two of them together, and playing dynamically with that mix rather than just taking it as one element that always has to be the same throughout the entire song. That's another part of the dance that Live are trying to formally do is taking those raw sounds, but then evolving them and changing them during the life of the song to create different sounds out of it. So on the one hand, I've got a sound from the modular going through the computer. But I can go the other direction too. I have a particular module in here called beads for mutable instruments. It's what's called a granular process. And what a granular processor is it takes the original sound that comes up and chops it into pieces, referred to as grains. And they can take those pieces and shift them in time, reverse them, play them back at different pitches, overlap them. So instead of having just a simple repeat of the sound, you get back this scrambled effect of the sound, repeated multiple times in different ways to make the sound much more complex. And the way I was using that, and let me just do a couple quick setups, and I'll explain this peripheral gear more here in a second. I just want to focus on the sounds right now. Is make sure I have, yes, my beads tuned. Okay. So I was taking a sound that's being played strictly from the laptop computer, Tibetan Dharma phrases, sending it through USB cable to this module that converts it to audio signals, processing it through a module, in this case, that I can control, and sending it back to the computer to mix together with everything else. I'm going to start with this in a somewhat normal way. So I can play one of the phrases of the Tibetan Dharma, and it'll come back sometime later, chopped up, transposed in different ways. So.
Buddha of compassion.
It's going with the beats, and coming back as
Compassion. Passion. Buddha of passion.
So we can take that, take different segments of it, and change them in time. I can tell it to go ahead and pitch shift them, so they come back at a different pitch.
O Buddhas of the past, present, and future.
Very low. Very low.
Bodhisattvas.
But what I was doing in particular last night was not just chopping it up, playing at different times, transposing in pitch. I could also say, play those grains backwards. So when she said something in English, it came back what sounded like a foreign language. It was actually bits of her phrases being played backwards. That's when you get something like this.
Please hear my anguished words of truth.
And then I have some of what's called feedback turned up, where it takes that output, feeds it back to itself, granulates it again, plays it back to late again, kind of different pitches, etc. So what's exciting for me with a hybrid system is I can combine the strengths of the modular system and what I like to control with my hands. The laptop, where it has lots of processing power, but I don't necessarily want to mouse around on it during a performance. In fact, I didn't even look at the computer all last night during the performance. I was just using it from this interface to play notes on it, and sending it sounds from the modular and letting it go ahead and process it. The other part of what I was doing last night is trying to recreate Steve's large mixing console, but in something more portable and compatible with the computer. So there's a number of what are called control surfaces. This looks like a mixer, but no sound actually goes through this device. It is strictly a user interface for a software mixer that's inside my laptop. So I can go ahead and say, let me look at different channels of sound. We have a global view here. My first set of 8 sounds, or my second set of 8 sounds, change their levels, change their effect steps, play with the EQ, and it's telling the computer, here's how I want those sounds to be processed. So I can still have a very tactile type of interface, like what Steve was using, so you can just, with your eyes closed, grab the faders and start fading things up and down. But it's controlling my computer rather than the sound actually going through a large board. And that's, again, a convenience for me to be able to input something an airplane without it myself. And this, as I mentioned before, is able to push. It has several different personalities. It can edit sounds. It has a nice graphic display of many of my plugins, like what my equalizers are doing. It has these buttons I can press to launch sounds. Or I can put it into note mode and say, let's go ahead and play notes on a particular synthesizer. Another evolution that I'm doing is, again, kind of inspired by what Steve does, is a large part of Steve's performances are to create what I call these harmonic clouds, where he'll play sequences of chords, slow attacks and slow releases, and they overlap each other. And he will actually live record a sequence of those, and then keep circulating over and over again at a very slow pace. So you have this evolving cloud of harmonic sounds rather than playing like a piano or something like that. I do something similar to that here, where I have a device called an arpeggiator. And arpeggiators are typical keyboards. You hold down a few notes and it plays repetitively. You do an octave. But if you slow it down and have sounds with really long attacks and releases, rather than having this pointillistic stuff, you have these beautiful sound clouds, like what Steve is doing. So if I press a couple of octaves and a couple of perfect fifths above it, and feed that into this, just let it go by itself. I'm going to start pressing the higher notes. I have it going through effects on a pre-fader stem, so I can say, here's just the effects. And I can even play with that balance, like I can feed it just through the reverb in this modular. Or it sounds like that. Or I can set it just through the plug in my computer, which is a much more angelic sound. I can blend the two together. And then I can come back and start mixing in the original sound out of the plug-in synthesizer. And this plug-in is actually a software recreation of one of Steve's keyboards, the Chord Wave Station. That sound dry by itself is this sound. And adding reverb to it. Playing with the mix, going back to just the reverb sound. That's a convenient device for a performer like me, because I can go ahead and enter different chordal structures. Maybe a seventh, maybe a little third up high. Have to play different chords or different root notes, let that evolve, and then play other notes on top of it over here against the ear. So this is like something normal. Switch to another sound and just play a sound line on top of it. its own. And then I can come back later and enter notes into it later on and have a whole those notes instead. So that gives an idea of how I'm combining the worlds of virtual synthesizers and virtual mixing with the most basic of the hardware synthesizers or modular synthesizer, where I'm getting these different sounds and combine them. For example, I was playing for you earlier a kick drum sound that I particularly like to play with. This is a particular module from WMD called a crater, as in the kick's so big it creates a crater in the ground. Simple sound. And I had an echo on it to create a little rhythmic after pattern. But then I'm also taking that sound and I'm processing it through one of the resonator modules inside my synth to create a different sound. I love epic percussion. And I love particularly those large ocean or frame drums, as they're called, that have beads inside of them. So when you hit them, you don't get just the boom of the skin, but you get this rattle of all the beads inside. I wanted to recreate that sound, so I took this crater kick and fed it to a resonator. That's where I got this sound. And then I can combine the two. And since a resonator, something that resonates the sounds that's going through a skin or a tube, can be tuned, I tuned that particular resonator to the bass pitch of the piece I played last night at B flat, and it almost works as my bass line throughout the whole piece. Create a more complex pattern. A little bit of echo. The echo is emphasizing the high frequencies, not the low frequencies. So a low hit is getting a higher response. I can make one sound sound like two people interacting with each other. That's a lot of information. Any questions on how people use this stuff or how I'm combining these with some of my choices I've made and how I'm mixing these things together?
It's a grid, the launch key on the top, launch pad on the top one.
This is called a Launchpad Mini. It's made by a company called Novation. And a lot of people use these pads to either just create the drum sounds or to play notes like I was doing over here. I actually have this one connected to the sequencer I like to use. This is a digital version of the sequencers that Steve had in the big black modular case on the side. This is a vector sequencer made by 512. And this acts as a user interface for the 512 sequencer. I can go into its menu items and say, let me change this parameter, then switch over to this alternate pattern. But he's allowed us user interface and make it very easy to call up different patterns without having to dive into the user interface. And that's another important thing that Steve was hitting on. He doesn't want to spend time paging through a computer while he's playing. He likes very flat interfaces, and I agree with that. So in my case, I'm trying to get user interfaces to allow me to quickly switch between things. Let's go ahead and bring that up. So I've programmed 3 different parts in here. An additional percussion part. This line is that plucked string sound. This line is the synthesizer sound. I put an all muted pattern down here at the bottom, so I know these are at rest. No sounds are coming out. But if I want to play, for example, this plucked sound, I know my simplest one is at the very top here. And the busier pattern is the next one down. And then a variation of that is my next one down. Synthesizer row and say, you start playing that pattern as well. So I find that user interface makes it easier for me graphically what's going on, what lines you're playing, which variations of design, and to quickly switch things. I have the vector sequencer set up to just make changes on the next measure. So I can go ahead and cue something up ahead of time and go somewhere else knowing that that change is going to happen on the downbeat, not the second I touch it. But what I also like about the vector is it's a very powerful sequencer, but it has a section I love called chance operations. And it takes each note and says, what variation would you like me to maybe play on that note? And what's the possibility that I'm going to play that variation rather than the original sound? And I can go ahead and program that individually or on MOS for all the steps of my sequence. So instead of having the same repetitive pattern going all the time, every single time, I can say, hey, you, every now and then I want you to go up an octave, or I want you to skip a note. But just do it half the time, and let the machine do that while I go play another part. So it's creating variations. I'll demonstrate a couple of those in a second, while I can focus on playing another musical line, rather than having to tend to that one particular musical line. And one of my general goals when working with machines is not to create machine music, but to try to teach the machine what would I want to do. You know, if I was playing the same bass line over and over again, I would throw in changes every now and then. Well, let me teach the machine how to do those changes, so it can go do that, and I can focus on playing another part. So that's a large part of my selection of these modules is which ones are going to create intelligent variations, not completely random, but intelligent ones that I can play with. For example, this simple pluck line. I can set it up just to play low E flat, high E flat. And to mute all the other notes, not play them. But then if I want more density, if I want more notes to be filled in, I can say, okay, there's a small chance you're allowed to play that note. And start changing the probability. And start adding some additional notes. And if I want to play more notes, I say, okay, there's a higher chance you get to play that note. Or I can say, go ahead and play all the notes all the time. So you can see by watching these red LEDs, that's a step or note in the sequence. I can say, skip them, so you're seeing a red LED but no note. And then say, okay, here's a possibility you get to play that note. So this is a simple thing of just skipping notes. I also have done it with transposition. I could have just played the sequence all the way through the same way every time. But I could say, well, take some of those notes and transpose them up a perfect fifth, maybe half the time. So each playthrough has a slight variation to it, rather than being the same thing all the way. Now, the one other trick I like to do with this machine is it's typical for sequencers. Let me turn down the volume for this for a second. It's typical for sequencers just to play very metronomically, every eighth note, or every quarter note, or whatever. I like to program my sequencers to follow patterns that I would normally use for drums. So rather than just being da 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 da. And that's why I'm using, again, grids to drive the sequencer. So I get some different rhythmic patterns for those notes. So I'll turn that up and play with the grids thing, and you can see it. Change the patterns of how fast it's playing notes. manipulate the machine while playing and saying, rather than just playing a sequence all the way through, I'll play with how fast I want you to play that sequence, how much skipping I want you to do, or how much I want you to fill in all the notes, just to create more variations on the same basic raw material. So it's a similar ideas to what Steve's doing, but taken in a different way of having source material, and how can I change that source material for these variations and layer them together in different ways. Any other questions about this gear on the Meyer?
Where's the echo coming from?
In this case, those echoes happen to be plugins that are inside Ableton Live. We'll cut to the computer here quickly. I have on one of my sends, and it's kind of hard to see on the screen, but it's called a multitap delay, 3 different delay patterns at different musical intervals, and each one has its own frequency equalizer as well. So this repeats only in the mid-range, this one's only in the high frequencies, this repeats only in the mid frequencies. They create those different patterns of these notes. So the way I've set up the mixer here is I have 2 main reverbs. One that's in the computer, one that's my module here inside the module. I have 2 main delays. One that's inside the computer, one that's these modules down here. I can go ahead and manipulate. But then I also have one more send to go through that granular effect, the thing to chop up the sound, to play it back different times, different pitches. And then I have what I call just a free agent. I have 2 things I can patch any way that I want, depending on what song I'm playing at a particular step. So I've got the 6 sends in my virtual environment, similar to what Steve's doing, but I'm splitting those up between things that are in the computer and things that are in my module. In the computer, like that echo, I like that echo effect, I timed it out the way I want it to be. I'm not changing that while playing. But if I want to dynamically change the echoes, I'll instead send it to the echo that's in the modular, so I have all these knobs to go ahead and directly change that echo while I'm playing. So there's a mental division of, that's fine as is, that can be in the computer, it can just do its thing, I'll leave the computer alone, or I really want to manipulate that sound. Let's go ahead and put it through a module. To give another example of that, let's bring up the wave station again, send it just through the EQs inside the modular. You see the reverb. It's a notes playing on that. Let's get range here. And I'll go all reverb. This reverb also allows me to add a shimmer on top, but I can also tune the pitch of that shimmer. Give it to transpose down in pitch. As long as how long the delay is. Very short. So if I want to edit the sound live, I'll put it through the modular, mix in the original sound. And play those live. If I'm happy with what the computer's doing, instead, I'll send it to the computer one. Just do its thing. I really don't want to mouse around on the computer while I'm playing this, but I really love the power of the computer while playing this. So I'm using it as my hired backline musicians just to play their parts, and I don't have to deal with them. And then the soloist can be me up front with the modular playing the parts I want to play. Now the fun part is that I just switched to this waveform. In my studio at home, I have hardware synths, I have virtual instruments, I have a really large modular. mix all of those. And during COVID, that's what I used. I performed all my music at home in my studio, where I had all of my tools available. Now that things are loosening up a bit and people are starting to go back out and do live performances again, I wanted to think, how could I take that studio experience out into a live environment without having to bring 2 bands worth of gear? And this has been my answer, is to have a hybrid of a suitcase-sized modular, a laptop, some nice user interfaces to control the laptop, and that's how I'm going on live.
It seems like the curse of modular performing live is that you have one song kind of patched up. How do you avoid that curse?
It is a problem. It's easy to like really fall in love with a patch, but that's your sound. And you know, when you think, here's the funny thing about modular people, is because we can create new sounds, we feel an obligation to create new sounds. But if you go watch a band with a drummer, a bass player, and a guitarist, rhythm guitarist, they had pretty much the same set of sounds for every song that they're playing. There's nothing saying a modular musician can't go out and say, here are my sounds, I'm going to create some different songs with that power of sound. But modular people will say, well, because I can change it, I really should change it. So I look for modules in this system that allow me to quickly change the character of the sound. For example, on this resonator rings, which I've got pulled up here, I'll put some notes with it. It has 3 basic models, a metal plate, a single string, and synthetic strings. And I can change between those models here. So that's one way to come up with different sounds for one module. When I was doing that last night for different sections, I was pulling out different models. It's the same module, but it could be 3 different sounds. And same for my synthesizer, Synth Voice. I have 2 digital oscillators that can change personalities. One is called, it's a version of a Modular instrument Braids that has many different algorithms, different ways of producing pitches and sounds. And also a Cloud's Twin Waves, which also has a number of different ways of producing sounds. So I can pick just one of them, like the Braids, and I can say, let's use different models. There's noise-based ones, symbols. So one module that may come with a lot of different timbres, and I can change those for each song with a different timbre. I have a filter that allows me to change in different modes. It's a Polaris from Intelligent. So I can say very bright filter, or very closed down multiple filter. I can say be a low pass filter, or a band pass filter, or a high pass filter. So I can quickly take a handful of modules and come up with different sounds. And then I have to have notes. Like you saw Steve's legal pads. For me, it's the Notes app on my phone. And let's go ahead and move over to that. This is last night's performance notes. And I don't know if anyone noticed, when I came out, I put my phone down. And I was, instead of looking at sheets of paper or all the tape stuff Steve has around his system, I was scrolling through my notes in my phone of what I was supposed to do next and how I was supposed to change parameters to change the sounds. There we go, like that sound. Back to low pass filter. And that's just one oscillator. I've got a cycle line with clouds with a different sound, but also allows me to change algorithms. So it's quick for me to change sounds. Have we any questions from the chat that I've been ignoring as well? Yes?
We have one from YouTube. They say, howdy.
Howdy.
I would love to hear about your exploration of the push 2 and how it's used in the rack.
I've been using the Push 2, that's the name of this device by Appleton. I have not used it yet with effects racks or instrument racks. I've been using it strictly as a keyboard instrument to play virtual synthesizers inside, or to launch clips to individual samples. And the other thing I use Push for, it has a very nice graphic display along the top here that I'll go ahead and use to edit some things like equalizations and that. But I've not used it to manipulate entire racks of effects.
Are you launching these clips that are sent to
Yeah, what Tony is asking, another way of going hybrid is modular synthesizers talk in the language of volts. How high of a voltage am I sending this module? Well, maybe that means a higher pitch. A sudden spike in voltage may mean trigger a new sound. A changing voltage may say open and close a filter. It's possible to give plugins for your computer that will then go through an interface and send voltages to your modules. So your computer can also play the modular. Vice versa, you can have your modular create interesting patterns of modulations or sequences, have that converted into something like MIDI commands, etc., to then manipulate plugins inside the laptop. That's a level of integration I've not gone to yet. I'm literally using this as a way of taking racks of effects gear and racks of keyboards and putting into one thing I can still into a backpack. That's been my focus now. Rather than going to that next level saying, you talk your language, and then control it that way.
Lots more than
It's, yeah, and when I went out in October, and I was trying to decide, how can I recreate my studio environment with something I can throw into the back of my car and take out to a venue that was local? I was like, okay, I'll bring one desktop. Okay, but I like the second one as well. Okay, I'll sample the first one, load it into samples that play back from a black box. So I had long evolving arpeggios and paths loaded as 64 bar loops in the black box, play back in time with the modular. And then I brought a second desktop synth and played its pad interface to play the notes live, but the pads on top. And I said, this is going to be crazy. I can't start bringing several desktop synths into a backpack onto an airplane. That's when I decided to move to the computer and just start using plugins. Fingers crossed so far it's working. Yeah.
In a hybrid setup, Chris, do you follow any rules on what becomes your master clock? Because you probably have a few modules there that can send clock, but that doesn't always mean you should.
I like things that are rhythmically tied together. So I do try to make sure that the entire system is running on the same clock. And it basically comes down to who's good at following somebody else. I have found that Ableton Live, at least in its current versions, is lousy at following somebody else. If CPU becomes overloaded, it starts glitching out. So by default, that's kind of meant that everyone had to follow the laptop instead. So everything inside the application synchronizes to the application. That's easy. I then have it send MIDI clocks. MIDI is musical instrumental interface. It's a way of sending commands between hardware synths. Sending clocks to my vector sequencer, so all those notes are in time with the laptop. And then the vector sequencer, through this module up here, this expander, is now sending clocks to grids, to the circles, to Pam's new workout, to the Strymon, to the Echo device, to keep all of them in sync with the main system. It did take a day for me to be a techie and say, how do I get everyone to line up? Because everyone had little delays in how well they responded to clocks. So I basically had to tell the laptop, you send clocks to this guy 45 milliseconds ahead of time to what you're doing down there. And now that brought everyone back in line. Some of these modules have a delay from play a sound. Oh, I'll play a sound now. So I had to dial that back out in software by using track delays, saying back this sound up earlier in time because it's a little slow. And it took a day to work all those timings out, but I've got everyone down pretty tight within a millisecond of each other. The other convenient thing about this is that running clock count, I have a measure counter in my vector sequencer. This has a measure counter over here I can look at to see where I am during the song. And also, in the case where I have a time limit where I have to get off stage, I can turn this over to running time and see how many minutes or seconds I can play and know if it's time to get off stage or whatever. So that's been another useful thing to be able to glance at that I know, okay, it's time to introduce a new element, wait till an odd number measure, because I measured 1, 3, 5, or where I like to start things. I'll watch that bar count and pre-cue something over here and start playing. Yes. Yes.
How much of your performance is
I plan out, so the question was, how much of the performance is improvised, how much is planned? I plan sections I want to land in. But when I'm inside that section, then I'm improvising in that section. And then when I feel I've been in that world long enough, then I will transition to the next planned section, where I'll go through my phone. The text to the red on my phone are the view settings I have to change in all the instruments here. So I know, oh, I have to change these dials before I go to the next section. And then the next thing in black, that's my next section I'm gonna start playing. It gives me some just general rules like, oh yeah, you're playing these following things, try varying that. And then it's improvised around inside that section. But I already know what's the next section I want to go to after that. And that's the fun thing about building up a piece ahead of time is the week before, it's all these individual sections that sound good on their own. But stringing them together into performance is the next bit of like, this goes before that, this should go after that. How do I get from here to there? Coming up with ideas is easy. Stringing ideas into a song is much more challenging. If not any more questions, and I'm happy to answer questions, what I thought I'd do next is actually go through last night's performance. But in every change I make, stop and explain, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm going to do next. To get an idea of what I was up to. Now, part of what I do is a reset to make sure I have a known starting point. So I go to my sequencer, and at the start, I tell it to load. I should update this. Oops. My starting point for the sequence, so I know that all of my sequences are at their base thing. Everything's at their rest position down here. All my chance probabilities are where I want to start. I can modify them later if I want to. And I go to my software and tell it to load the starting point. Don't save changes. If you want to load something different. See, this all changed the mix to where my starting point is supposed to be. These instead, I'm going to do that version. And, oh, there we go. So now everything's at the starting point for the song. And I know all my levels are set correctly, and everything's going to start off really funky and like that. I have a little set of notes that say, things to remember to reset, such as turn down the kick drums. It doesn't start with a massive kick drum like the very start. I want to bring that up later. What are my settings for this rings module? Oh yeah, that's supposed to be, the resonator mode with like synthetic strings. Change these controls to, I'm going to have one and a half. I'll let you in on something that happened last night. I went to go change settings in this module in between sections, and I grabbed the wrong knobs. And I changed different knobs I intended, just new settings, and it came back with a sound I did not anticipate last night while playing. And I just had to dance around that and go with that sound, even though it's not the one I intended last night. So that's part of the danger and the thrill of the live performance, is how do you go between stuff. Set my filter to where I want it to be. The mix on the oscillator, I have all these notes ahead of time. Just get everything at their starting point. Make sure everyone's in tune. I have a tuner built into my modular case, and my oscillators, my sound generators go through. I can see if tuning has drifted on these. It has a little bit. So I put those back in tune. Inside my software, I have tuners for a lot of the other sounds that come through as well, so I can go ahead and tune stuff up. Make sure everything's ready to start. So I'll start the clock. Everyone's muted right now. And I started last night with a low drone on the virtual wave station plugged inside here. So what I did was I had it set up to arpeggiate, change note every measure of music, and I just picked two low notes that were the same root flat that the song is in. And the next measure, we started doing that drum, started the bass last time. Right now it's mostly the reverb of it. And I had fun bringing in the dry sound. After I let that go through a few cycles, I felt like, okay, we've established my smooth. I changed my push control over to what's called session mode, where all my samples are. And these rows are the woman speaking the Tibet's Dharma, broken into section 1, section 2, and section 3 during the song. And these are the 4 phrases. So I kind of know I want to bring those in 4 measures apart. So I'm paying attention over here to what my measure count is, so I can launch it, keep a track of the time, and then launch the next one 4 measures later on. So I brought the first one, this measure,
Buddha of compassion.
letting beat to its reverb thingy. Counting these, okay, we're almost at 4 measures. The second one queued up.
O Buddhas of the past, present, and future.
Queue up the next one.
Bodhisattvas.
One, 2, time for the next one.
Please hear my anguished words of truth.
And while that's ringing out, I'm changing modes of this to bring up one of my synthesizers in here, change it to note mode. So when this is done, I can bring in this low note underneath it. The voice is faded away. I play this introductory phrase here. If I felt it was too quiet in the room, I would ride and fade over here. I'm playing these notes in free time. I'm not counting measures. I'm just doing what sounds good with the reverb of the room. I get a high shimmer come in, picking these notes. Let them ring out. Back to the roots. Strong bass. At this point, I want to make a transition from that very floaty beginning and start bringing the drums. I know I want to start the drums on an odd numbered measure. The first measure is 1. I like to do things in 2 measure intervals. 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, etc. I'm keeping an eye on this, both to know when to tell this module to start triggering the drums, but also to go ahead and kill off the wave station arpeggio. So I'm waiting until this feels good, so everything's died down in the reverb. I'm waiting for that to be on an odd number, so I can get it right beforehand. And I turn off the arpeggio. So now I have to think ahead. What's next? Oh, I need to trigger that feminine voice. She's in session mode. She's these purple buttons, or these lilac buttons. So I count these out, these feel good. And I cue her up for the voice. And she came in right on the downbeat because I have all this quantized happening on sorts of measures. A lot of that reverb was recorded with her voice, but I'm also adding some of the shimmer effect in the laptop to get a really nice high floating sound as well. So while she's going, I'm reading my notes about what do I do next? Okay, this needs to be in preset 6, so get that ready. Okay. And you're hearing this plucked string sound. The fader's down on it, but it's just going through the reverb to create a ghosty sound to begin with. If I felt that was too quiet, I'd switch over to my effects returners and bring that up. I thought she's not had enough, I'll go back to wave station and say, okay, let's restart the arpeggio. And then to add some energy, I'll start mixing in the dry kick drum with that big resonant sound. Now I'm going to do another change, bring up energy, where I'm going to bring just the rings in by itself. I'll actually stop the rings for a moment, so the high frequencies die away. Start increasing the intensity of the kicks by saying add in more beats to that pattern. And then I have notes in red during this thing. Now, quickly change these following knobs. That's the left brain dance of these live performances of getting out of the zone, having to think ahead, then go back into the zone again. So I'm like, okay, red mode resonator, right is down to 11, damp up to 2.5, grid's 3 up, play that pattern, oh, bring up the dry level. Okay, I'm ready. That's part of the dance you're not seeing during these performances, getting all that going. So when it's ready, I trigger a sequence. This is the one that has chance operations on what contributes notes, so it starts very sparse. I can start to turn down the probability so fewer notes are muted. I also have control over how fast it's being triggered or what pattern it's triggered with. How long it's going to bring out. And break down notes. So this is the part where I'm improvising, saying, how am I going to change the sounds? Register or what octave this part's playing in. So I together want to bring in the shaker and drop the note sound off. When I've had enough of that, I can just turn off the notes. Transitions of like stop a section, let it die away, introduce a new element, read my notes, what do I have to change in the next section? Unfortunately, very little this time around. Reset the octave, okay? Oh, I want to play something different on the wave station. Let's bring it up so I'm ready for it. Said lower the damping. Okay, I'll do that now. Hopefully I've got it all done by the time she's done singing. But now that I've done that left brain stuff, I can go back to the right brain and go. Staying the same key throughout the whole piece, it might get a little bit boring. So I programmed a few changes in ahead of time. A pattern that has some different notes in it. And I know to play some different notes on the wave station to complement that. So I play a pattern with a 7th and 5th on the wave station. And then go to the alternate pattern. Trigger another voice break. Notes in red, but they're going to have to change. There's a juggling act for your performance. Changing the settings for the grids, bringing up the synthesizer level, changing what patterns are going to come up when I'm ready with these vocals are done. For this next section, I kind of want to open up some more space. So I said, okay, let's go ahead and both change the shaker and drop out the wave station. Wait for it to cue this up. And wave station, notes. You go to just beats for a bit. And then start triggering the notes. Synthesizer, and it's similar to chance operations for muting notes randomly. I can play all the notes. Or mute some of them randomly. One of the reasons I like that is I have a duplicate of that sequence set up for the plucked string, but they each have their own chance operations. So I can go ahead and introduce the plucked string sound. But they're each individually making choices when to move notes. So they're playing this counterpoint where some are playing solo, some are playing unison. I have some percussion patterns, percussion sounds in the computer, but I have the pattern for them loaded in the sequencer and I'm on this control. So I said, let's start playing those sounds. Using the same idea, I can do them fast. patterns for both synth put together. Now take the pluck string with an up and octave for creation. And I generally improvise and play around with those different sounds to make some timbres. So I'm ready for it to stop. I'm ready to trigger some voices. Pull down the trigger on that. Looking side down. Next set of voices.
Let the might of your compassion arise to bring a good end
I noticed things I need to change here.
to the flowing stream of the blood and tears. What is right and what is wrong? They are drunk with demonic delusions.
Now that I've made all my red note setups during those phrases, I go back to a new sound and a new pluck string solo. After I've improvised enough, I'll play some another female vocal break. Add a bunch of notes from red to check if that's set correctly. Change the settings on the pluck string module again. Change the parts to be played here, that's good. So check the octave, back down where it should be. Alright. But that's it. Next thing is bring in some new notes. Oh, and a new shaker pattern. Change the shaker and play some new notes. Let's start playing more solos. Starting out with just the pluck sound. And I can add in the synthesizer sound for that matter too. I have a sound effect of surf that I want to end this piece with. So I kind of sneak it in now where it's not really obvious. There's a lot of stuff going on. When things die away, we'll reveal the surf. I'll start the surf sample. I'll press the click pedal to hold the surf. And I can go to other things later. It's kind of underneath right now, you can really hear it. I played these last few new phrases.
Our most cherished and long-felt desire. The ocean of measureless qualities.
Okay, that's the percussion.
In an ocean of joy.
Change over to play one of my soft synthesizers. Repeat an intro phrase. Fade out the kick. Change over to repeating wave station room, just low notes. One last vocal phrase. Fade out the drums. Now you start to hear the ocean, now that's thin things out. I have notes in red to change the granular engine to not play things in reverse anymore, but play them forward for this last time.
In an ocean of joy.
Release the wave station. Go to the surf. And then release it so it fades out on its own. And that's the dance I was doing last night during my performance. And that was 24 minutes right there. So it gives you an idea of what electronic musicians are going through when they're playing solo. A lot of it is being in the moment and zone and playing around like, oh, let's really make these ring out, let's pull them back, and other fun stuff like that, and transpose. But there's also a lot of, okay, I need to change what this thing's going to do next. Let's gotta change all these parameters to get ready for my next section. So that's the dance. Now that you've seen the whole process play through, any questions? Yeah.
What did the process look like when you first started creating an
You know, when I just start creating, and I do a lot of this still, it's just what I now call R&D time. It's just saying, I'm going to play around with an idea. I'm not trying to create a competition. I want to play with, what does it sound like to play drums to a resonator? What does this module sound like if I change it to the vocal mode instead of the wave mode? And I'll just spend time playing with a module and seeing what sounds I can get out of it. Now, during that play time, I'm doing two things. One, I'm building an inventory of ideas. Oh, that sounded good. I could use that later. And there's a good song idea. I'll even start writing it down as though this could be a song. Write down those notes. But I'll spend a day playing with an idea and just seeing what variations can come out of that idea. And it's only later when I say, you know, how about one of these sessions came this germ of an idea that was really good. Let's take that and then start taking my other ideas from other sessions and start adding them on top of it. So trying to build a song out of these ideas from these individual playtimes. So it's not like songwriting non-stop. A lot of it is like, okay, let's just learn what this thing can do, and explore some ideas. Does it sound like I play this musical key today? What does it sound like if I play the wave station today? But I'm cataloging things that then will be put together into songs later on. So, you have a question or? Any questions online or? I guess that's that. Thank you for the marathon sessions last night and today. I hope you're going to be back tonight to see the performances. Ooh, and the varsity camp as well. So